If you want to be a better sight reader, keep on watching because in this video I'm going to be spilling all my sight reading secrets. You ready? Hey guys, it's Maria. Welcome back to my channel. I post videos every single Thursday giving you guys the best tips and tools for being more effective in your practice sessions and helping you achieve your musical goals. So if you're new, consider subscribing. Last week I gave you part 1 of sight reading secrets, and if you haven't seen that video, it's going to be linked up here. So many of you guys commented saying you can't wait for part 2, so here it is. This time I'm giving you 4 more expert sight reading tips, and stick around till the end of the video because I'm going to be sight reading a piece I've never seen before using these tips. Let's get into it. Before I get into any of these tips, just a quick disclaimer that these tips will only work if you practice sight reading regularly, so try to fit it into your warm-up and practice schedule so you can practice it every day. And I talked a little bit more about how to do this exactly in part 1, so if you need a little bit of a refresher, be sure to check back to that video. Alright, let's get into the tips. Tip number 1 is keep a steady beat. We already talked about picking a sustainable tempo, but this is more about the rhythm and the pulse. So before you start sight reading, scan over the first few bars of your music and try to group the notes visually by beat. First of all, you'll have better rhythm, and second, if anything goes wrong, you'll be able to get back on track with whatever beat comes next without skipping a beat. Let me explain what I mean. So many times when I'm sight reading, especially chamber music, but solo music as well, there's just so much going on the page, and I'm sure you guys can relate, that I just feel overwhelmed and I need to take a second to figure everything out. And when I'm already playing, the only way I can take that second is if I have that inner metronome that will make sure that I don't get lost or fall behind while I'm figuring everything out, and I can land safely on the next downbeat or even on the next beat without disrupting too much of what's already going on, without distracting my soloist or my other chamber partners. So there's really no shame in feeling overwhelmed when you're sight reading. It happens to everyone all the time. You just have to know how to deal with it. So the alternative would be probably to feel overwhelmed, ruin the rhythm, get lost, fall behind, and as you can imagine, this would be more or less fine if you're playing solo music because you're not playing with anybody, but it would be disastrous if you're accompanying or playing chamber music. So you really want to work on having that inner metronome so that when you do have to take a second to figure everything out, you can land back on your feet on the next beat. That rhymed. Another benefit of keeping the beat and grouping the notes visually is that you can simplify harder parts. So I'll insert an example of what I'm talking about, but sometimes the accompaniment part is just way too hard to play on the spot, and in that case, you want to just take the downbeats or just the bass notes or just the harmonies, usually in the left hand because you want to keep the melody intact. Tip number 2 is to spot patterns, and this comes with experience. So the more sight reading you do, the better you're going to become at spotting these sight reading patterns or classical music patterns, because generally classical music is built on some basic building blocks that you can count on. Some of the more common ones would be scales and chords, and as you get more advanced with your sight reading, you'll be able to spot things like alternating note patterns, third passages, octave, syncopations, and stuff like that. This will make sight reading so much easier because it will almost be as if you've already practiced that part of the piece, even though you're seeing it for the first time, because you've probably already seen it in a piece you've sight read before or even practiced before. So before you start sight reading, that was a lot of befores, scan your piece and see if you can break it into any building blocks, scales, chords, syncopations, rhythm patterns, alternating note patterns, any of that stuff, so you can make your life that much easier. And an expert tip within this tip, Matryoshka tip, would be to not look at every single note as its own thing. So if you have a note and a scale going up from it, you really only have to read that bottom note. Let your hand do its thing, and while you're doing that, you're looking ahead to see if there are any tricky spots coming up. And the same thing with chords, especially if they're all spaces or all lines, you really only have to read the bottom note, or technically you can read the top note too. I like to read the bottom note, and then just let your hand kind of fall into that pattern while you're looking ahead. And even with more complicated chords, if you scan them horizontally and see, look for common tones, then you don't have to read those notes again. You can just read the notes that change, and you can move faster or easier in that way. And if you have no idea what I'm talking about, I'll insert an example using Rachmaninoff's Second Piano Concerto, because we all know that that piece is full of chords. So for all of those, the middle was the same. You didn't have to read it. You can just focus on the octaves. Here is where it changes. That's the middle. So again, you can focus on reading the octaves. Tip number 3 is look for hand positions. And this is one of those things that I didn't know that I did until I stopped sight reading because of lockdown, and I talked a little bit more about this in my previous video, and then I had to get it back. So what usually slows a lot of people down is changing hand position. So for example, if you're playing at the bottom of the keyboard and then suddenly you have to move to the top and you're not prepared, that can really slow you down. And when worst comes to worst, of course, you can use tip number 1, which is keep a steady beat, skip a few notes, and just land on the next downbeat. You'll be okay. But of course, you want to be as accurate as possible when you're reading the score, and you want to look ahead to see if you can see any clef changes, leaps, or other changes of hand position before it's too late, aka before you're already playing it. So again, before you start playing, scan your score to see if you can spot any clef changes, leaps, or changes in hand position so you can be as prepared as possible. And the 4th and final tip is to train your eye to read 2 staves at one time. Or if you're accompanying or playing chamber music, 3 or more staves. So you have your left hand, your right hand, which is pretty much it if you're playing solo music, unless you're playing Canadian music. I actually just realized that. I have like 4 staves with my Canadian piece. But if you're accompanying or playing chamber music, then you need the soloist's line. And if you're playing a quartet or quintet, you of course have 4 or 5 lines that you have to keep in your field of vision at any given point. In the previous video, we talked about the importance of training your eye to look ahead, but what's equally as important is training your eye to read multiple staves as you play the music. So you might be wondering why this is important, and the reason is, well, first of all, your soloist might make a mistake. Your soloist might skip a beat or a few bars, or I've even had a page, and you have to be paying attention to where they are and constantly be checking back to whether or not you're playing together with them. And I know that I'm teaching you not to skip a beat and to have that inner metronome, but you can't expect everyone, especially when they're under pressure, to always be able to do that. And as an accompanist, as a pianist, it's your job to be their safety cushion, so they know that no matter what happens, you're always going to be there to catch them. But more commonly, you don't want to leave up to chance whether or not you're going to be playing together with your chamber partners or soloist. And if you're playing solo music, you still want to learn to read 2 staves at one time to avoid silly mistakes like missing accidentals or just playing wrong notes, random wrong notes in the hand you're not paying attention to while you're reading the other hand. And if it helps to know, conductors have to read 10+ staves of music at one time, to the point that their music is mostly vertical and not as much horizontal. So their one page is really only a few bars long because there's so much going on vertically. And I'll insert a picture of an orchestral score up here just so you know what I'm talking about. So we really don't even have it that bad. Alright, so let's go to the piano so I can show you all these tips in action. Let's do it. Okay, so we're at the piano, and I thought, what better way to demonstrate keeping a steady beat and simplifying than to take a piece with way too many notes in it. So I'm looking at Rachmaninoff, Opus 23, Prelude number 4. Let's just scan it over. So left hand looks like it starts with a bit of a pattern. I see D major, so let's just write that in. D major, That's an A7. And the right hand seems to have more of a simple melody. So if anything, we'll just only play the right hand. Okay. Off to a great start. Butchered that. I'm so sorry. So I actually didn't notice that the left hand has a bunch of clef changes and awkward little things to do. So I missed out a bunch of the left hand notes, but kind of kept the melody more or less intact. So if this was a piece of chamber music, I technically didn't lose the beat. Alright, so let's finish off with some Beethoven. And I don't think I'll have to simplify too much apart from just the emergency kind of skip a few beats and land on the downbeat. Patterns, yes, there are tons of, at the beginning there, just those 2-note patterns, they're everywhere. Here in the left hand, there's just that triplet pattern that keeps repeating, and that triplet pattern is basically all over the first page. There's a few tempo changes at the beginning. I'm probably gonna play it all at Largo, but all right, let's do it. So that's it for this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this video helpful. And if you have any more questions about sight reading or practice in general, leave them in the comments below and I'll be sure to answer them in future videos. If you liked this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe to this channel, and if you want to watch some more of my videos, you can do that right here. Bye, guys.